Hello. Today we're gonna start moving on to a different topic for these podcasts. We're gonna instead of focusing on LD, we're gonna go down a different path and start exploring Interp. Because although LD is my passion project, and definitely like the main reason why I do debate and I've been so devoted for it the past couple years of my life, I have still been doing Interp for over a little over 3 years now, and it is another thing that I have been decently successful with, and I definitely feel like I can pass on some information to you guys in this format. It's definitely going to be a lot harder than LD because Interp is more hands-on, which is definitely why, if your program has, yeah, even if they don't have like defined like captains or leaders who are set to teach Interp, you should definitely seek out people to go work with, or even just your coach to improve your piece with, because there's only so much you can get from watching a video. But if you're trying to get into Interp, we can work on getting your piece ready and like what generally you need to do to get through to that first tournament. And then from that point on, it's just, trying to slowly improve and work with other people and get better and better. But getting to that point is definitely the hardest part of Interp and all of the individual events in speech and debate. So hopefully this will help you progress at that preparation point in time. So today we're going to be discussing the first thing you need to do whenever you pick up an Interp piece, which is actually deciding what piece you're going to perform and like what script you're going to use. Although I'm going to try and provide just general information for Interp, my expertise is definitely in Memorize Interp, and beyond that, it's in Duo specifically, which I can usually help people in HI though. If you do DI, obviously that's going to change your piece structure a little bit, but generally it's just going to be more focused on having less characters overall, and obviously a sad story, whereas Interp has a lot more character, or HI has a lot more characters, and obviously a funny story. So most of the time, if you're doing one of those three, this should all be pretty universal. And even once you get into book Interp, it's still very similar. But this is definitely going to be most beneficial if you're in those like fields, because those are the ones that I personally have done and have experience with. But on that note, let's actually discuss what you need whenever you're picking a piece. So generally, the lesson I'll do whenever we first start talking about picking pieces is we will go and draw a plot diagram, which is something that you guys have certainly done many times in classes. I remember doing it a lot in like elementary and middle school. But if you don't remember, it's your little like mountain. If you've never heard of it, you can go look it up and see a picture of it. But it's a way that you can kind of see how like a story changes over time and the shape of a story. And it's focused on 5 main parts, where we start with our exposition, in which we get a whole bunch of things such as the setting, the characters, just basic ideas about what's going on in the piece. And then we move on to the rising action, which is all of the like big like things that like introduce the conflict and then start to get closer and closer to like the big moment of the piece, which then leads us to that big moment of the piece, which is the climax. We'll talk a little bit about identifying the climax because that's important, and we will do that whenever we're like more focused on it specifically. But the climax I always like to define as the moment when everything changes for the main character. Most people just think of it as like the like big dramatic like confrontation or whatever, depending on what type of piece you're doing and like what the conflict is. But as we'll discuss, it's important to structure a story around a character and how they change over the course of the piece. And the climax should generally be when that change occurs. And then beyond that, we have our falling action, which is, kind of cleaning up the rest of like all the loose ends. And then we have our resolution, which is our actual like end to the piece, and everything is like a happy ending or whatever. And yeah, that's like the basic structure of a story. This is, like I said, pretty like common for people, and you've definitely like have seen it before, even if you don't remember. But that's like the basic thing that we got to remember when we get into picking our piece, because as we read, we want to start checking off those boxes for a story that we want to tell. We're going to talk about in the next video, like how you can actually cut down your pieces and get them ready to perform. But the whole like idea behind Interp is that you're not going to perform the entire piece. You simply can't. There's generally too much going on. So you want to highlight what type of a story you want to tell from everything that's going on in this big story that you're pulling from. Um, and generally, it's going to be focused on one character and a specific struggle they have. It might be just like and the overarching struggle of the piece, and there's nothing really more you have to like think about for that. But sometimes it's a little bit more obscure because there's multiple things going on, or even if you're pulling from that big idea, you still have to identify what parts of the story are necessary for telling that story. But generally, whenever we're picking our pieces, we just want to make sure that we can identify like where the exposition is and what the rising action is, and most importantly, what the climax is. Because whenever we're reading for a piece, there's generally a couple things that you're going to want to look for. And the first is obviously going to be if you're doing like an HI or DI, you want to look for a piece that's like legitimately funny or sad. But those are a little bit less important because if it's not super funny, you can make it funny. Based off what you do with the piece is going to change how actually like entertaining it is. And it's the same thing with DI. You have to have a somewhat sad concept to work with, but depending on how you portray the characters and how personal you make it is going to change how sad the piece itself is. What's most important is having a good, relatable moral, and that's really like hard to find, honestly, because that moral you can't really change too much yourself. You can choose to like highlight it and make it very clear based off your cutting what it is, but you can't like implement a moral where there is none. And it's especially important that you do make it universal. I did a duo last year that we had like handwritten for us by a publisher that was about two brothers who like were separated and divorced. And me and my duo partner decided we wanted to do it because both of our parents had gotten divorces when we were young, and it was a personal piece for us with a really good moral. But unfortunately, the moral was not nearly universal enough. We were really split on how like what we got because you could clearly tell our judges who were like they could connect to that piece and they had like divorced parents or they themselves had gone through a divorce or whatever. They would generally rank us very high, and some of them would like get very emotional and cry and those types of things. But then on the other end, you had people who couldn't relate to that like idea, and generally they were a lot less touched by the piece, and it did a lot worse with those types of judges. Which is why making a like very universal theme is super important, because without it, you're only going to appeal to a small group of judges, and you're not going to do nearly as well. And that theme is by far the biggest thing when looking for a piece. Without that, there's not going to be much you can do to fix it. Like I said, with the other things, you can go through and make it funny yourself if you are good at it, like Interp. But there's only so much you can do if your theme is like non-existent from day one. So, but otherwise, whenever you're looking for a piece, obviously, like this is a given, but you just want to find something that you can like work with, because this is going to be your piece for a whole year, hopefully. I'm kind of bad about changing my piece as the year goes on, but this is going to be what you're stuck with for a long time. So you want to make sure that you are going to be happy with it, and that you're not going to get sick with it or run out of ideas over time. And obviously, it's impossible to know for sure if that's exactly the case. But that's why settling generally isn't good, because if you go into a piece already with a negative mindset and you're just thinking this is good enough instead of this is something you legitimately are going to enjoy doing, then you're setting yourself up for like a bad year, because you're just going to get to a point where you're so burnt out with the piece that you don't want to work with it anymore. But on that note, as long as you have a piece that clearly has these parts defined, has a good moral, and has something that you can relate to and like you can enjoy within the piece, there's not too much else you can really ask of yourself. Truly, the hardest part of deciding a piece isn't actually like trying to tell if the piece is good or not. It's simply finding a good piece, because there's so many different scripts that are out there to be read. And going through them all and finding one that isn't like just awful can be a big struggle sometimes. So on that note, I'm definitely going to keep this first video a bit shorter than most of the other Interp videos we're going to have, because you should just be out and reading right now if you are struggling like looking with a piece for a piece. But otherwise, I hope that this video was educational as to how we can get started and what you need for a piece. And I wish you good luck in your searches.